Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. What's today? I think it's Wednesday. Thanks for joining office hours this month. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Greg Anderson, and I'm the creator, now CEO at DefectDojo. And if you've attended our past sessions, this is a different setup from where I am normally. I'm in California for Dojo right now, and uh, Chris and I didn't want to reschedule on you, and so I'm doing it from here. So hopefully, the presentation and the audio and all those good things are coming through okay. But so for this topic, when we talk about vulnerability management and how we justify AI usage, what I wanted to do is start with the opportunities that we see for leveraging AI and security, and then we'll talk about, like how we justify these technologies and how we protect them, etc. And so, starting with opportunities for AI usage and security, or like first, like why even use AI and security at all? And I'm a big fan of being lazy when possible. I sometimes, when I was doing security testing, I hated the meticulousness that was necessary to do a good report. I would prefer to just do fun things in security rather than like doing the things that management would ask me to do. And so at the end of the day, why I selfishly want like AI to do better in security is to do as little work as possible and still accomplish our goals in security. I think also too, burnout in security is incredibly high. Security professionals are incredibly overworked. So any technology we can leverage to make our job a little easier, provided that it is secure, I'm essentially all for and advocating for. And so the last thing I want to mention is I'm really terrible at doing presentations, and so I've started using a lot of AI images so people don't have to look at my stick figures. And so on one hand, I think that's like maybe a little disrespectful to your audience to just, plug something in and generate an image. But I assure you, like what I could create on my own is a lot worse. And so, with that said, you know, when we look at innovations in the security market, I typically think about anything in security as three different bubbles, if you will. I think this is true for AppSec. We have this scanning phase, and then we have the vulnerability management phase, what Defect Dojo is typically in, and then we have the action phase. And I think this is true for like SOC alerts too. You have the discovery of the alerts, and then you have your SIM, and then you have what you do about it with SOAR by hand. And when we look at like AI innovation in security specifically, I think it kind of looks like this. And I think this might be for a reason, like where there's so little work being done in discovery, because there may be problems with determinism in AI that I think makes scanning hard to have like this real big AI uptick. But there's some innovation in our space, and we have some interesting things going on there too. But the big thing I see is kind of in the action phase. And when we think about like action or addressing things in security, I think the big topic is like auto remediation. And how we can use that potentially safely. And I think that breaks down into two things. It breaks down into, where do these fixes come from, but also how confident can we be in the quality of the fix that is being submitted. And so, starting with the second half of this, how confident can we be in that the what's being submitted is good? I think those things just come down to things that are typically outside of security. Like if you have great functional tests, I keep hearing the primary challenge why people don't want to use auto remediation is that it creates more work for developers to review, and that stresses out developers, and then the program falls apart. And so I think some people are looking to just completely automate these things, but I think the challenge culturally that makes AI usage and auto remediation specifically really, really difficult for people to implement beyond like the security implications of using these is there's a lot of programs that try to arbitrage like who is responsible for review. And I think at some point, security professionals are unfairly asked, well, which part of addressing things in code does security own, and which part do developers own? And so, um, from seeing a lot of programs, I think developers have to own the actual review of code, and I think security has to own the commentary of that quality. And so the things that I don't like, that I typically like to push back on when I hear from developers, is that they don't have bandwidth to address something. And the reason I don't think that's a great argument is, like, on one hand, it's basically just saying that, like, security is not a priority. I think that's what it really means at the end of the day. But why I don't think it's good to accept this as a reason is, the reality is risk doesn't change based on the bandwidth of a team. Risk is absolute. And so, I've generated this image here of a wall that has two holes in it with only one of them repaired. And if you don't address, like, all your high risk things, at the end of the day, like, you still have high risk. And the net outcome for the business is still the same. I also think, like, where we go wrong potentially in security in this process, and how these things break down, is we have to own the quality of what we're submitting to the developers for action. And so, I just think sometimes we get stuck in these blame games, which can, like, really hurt the adoption of the technology. And so it comes down to, if you can advocate for having the authority to jump or to fix something, you then, that justification has to be incredibly, incredibly solid with that power. I think the other thing that's really working against security professionals in this space is, there's kind of two types of security programs. There is, security programs that exist primarily for theater, is the reality. It's a checkbox exercise so that people can sell product. And I think you have to also recognize, like, what type of program you're in. I've been in some of those programs, in full transparency, and it can be a relaxing break from, doing things that are more impactful. And so, if at the end of the day you're in a compliance-based program, there's probably not a lot you can do to advocate for the improvement of security with any technology. But, there are programs that where the end goal is actually security. And so, if you're in the compliance checkbox one, you may just be doomed from the start. It may not matter, even if you have, good arguments for implementing a technology, whether it's AI or otherwise, or or if you have the right data and the right arguments and the right justifications for who should fix what to be effective, and where security's responsibility ends and dev's responsibility starts. um, they may just not be willing to listen. And so I think it's also important just to recognize that. And then I think the final thing before we start talking about like justifications and helping to secure AI is, there's a couple really interesting papers that vendors are putting out on AI determinism, and, like, where we should care in security and where we should not. And the idea is, unlike an algorithm, when you ask an AI something, you typically won't get the same answer twice unless it's a fairly narrow problem. And so, for auto remediation specifically, I don't think we care about if the fix is the same or not, as long as it has the same quality and it passes the tests. I think it's also the truth that when you fix these things, you're more likely to arrive at the same outcome regardless. Um, Intelligence and insights, I'm kind of on the fence about. So when we talk about, like, risk-based vulnerability management, you likely want uh, a vulnerability to always have the same risk outcome, essentially the same evaluation, whether it's, high risk or needs action, or however you're doing that calculation. You want those things to always be the same in a vacuum, because otherwise they can be hard to action and your prioritization can immediately change. And then I think scanning determinism is way, way more important, because when we talk about, comprehensive security testing, you want to be able to say from one week to another, one day to another, that the scanning you were you perform is consistent, and some compliance frameworks require that when you're going through these checkboxes of what your security testing entails or doesn't entail. And so finally, that brings us to specifically how we justify using some of these new technologies in security. And so when I think about the security of the AI, I think one constraint that's really unique in our industry is that we have a hyperfixation on the data security elements of AI because the data we handle is so incredibly sensitive. And so I think people always like to think that they have the best security themselves. And, sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes the data truly is safer somewhere else. So whether you are developing your own internal models or using a third party, if the third party's security is potentially better than your own and you're confident in that, then you can make that journey. But, the safer approach from our industry is just to run all of these things in a self-hosted manner, which is semi-difficult today in AI, but is getting easier and easier. And so, if you can remove like the third-party data risk, what we've generally seen is um, the resistance becomes much, much smaller. And then I think the second portion is the attack surface area, because there's all these unique vulnerabilities that are specific to AI that we still don't have like great testing tools for, whether it's prompt injection or poisoning or any of the other new vulnerability classifications that are hyper specific to LLMs. If we can like limit the surface area to where people are comfortable, that's I think kind of the second part of the equation that we've seen be extremely successful. And so when you put something on the public internet, there is so many additional considerations for security that we then have to justify, right? Like the easy answer is if it's not connected to the internet and it's in a closet somewhere and you put a security code on the door, what's the real risk? And so I think there are good ways, and there's more and more technologies in this space that let us bypass the risk of taking the shortest path using, OpenAI or Anthropic or one of these public services where all the data is intermingled, and you then have to trust that somehow all these vulnerability classifications are being patched or that their data security is perfect. Um, and then, so the other way that I like to slice this is highlighting all the benefits that people can get with AI and security to try and make the justification to people that make those decisions. So we have, like what we want to use it for, and then we have, I think, some of the objections to the general usage as it relates to security, and then like finally the benefits to make the whole argument. And so when I think about vulnerability management, this is typically the three pillars that I think about for a good program. We live in a time where it used to be just that aggregation was good enough, but now enrichment is so important with the flood of vulnerabilities that really happened in like late 2020. My co-founder Matt makes this joke that software is like, milk, and that it spoils over time. It doesn't get better. And so enrichment and prioritization has become so important for vulnerability management. And so metrics that we'll see improvement if we succeed in justifying AI usage in a security program is first mean time to remediation. So, relying on AIs to get these things done rather than humans. The number of total fixes, the velocity of said fixes, open to close trend, and overall velocity. And so, what I'm hopeful for is just to make security people's jobs easier. Is if we walk, security executives through these different arguments, they're more likely to adopt these things. And I think the other thing that I see painfully a lot is very frequently usage of AI is really about risk strategy, and strategy and vulnerability management tend to be disconnected more often than not. It's defined by compliance frameworks like ISO 27001 or it's baked in from something else, and people that are responsible for finding vulnerabilities are stuck in just this vacuum of, well, that's what I was told the standard was, and thus that's what I have to do, and there aren't these feedback loops. And so I really think we have to look at like what are we actually seeing, and then like continuously update risk strategy as it relates to exposures that are specific to your organization. And so basically, like what are you ultimately comfortable sharing with AI or not as it relates to risk strategy in your unique company? Because data sensitivity just has different levels. Like pharmaceutical is very different from, say, defense or banking, etc. And then finally, just moving to a couple other things, and I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but if you're new to these sessions, we always like to talk about some of the things that are coming on the commercial side of Dojo and then open source updates as well, just to tie all these things together. And so on the commercial side of the house, we do have a really big announcement and demo scheduled for AppSec USA that we're calling Sensei. And not to give too much away because Matt will be there and Matt will be doing that announcement. We think it solves and sidesteps many of the concerns people have around AI usage and security. And then the other big update is with DefectDojo's risk-based vulnerability management scoring. Another key piece of feedback is we had this really complicated formula to try and make sure that that prioritization scores were always accurate, thinking about things like exploitability, number of exposures, risk, etc., how easy it is to exploit. And we did come up with a calculator that is sort of a simple override, if you will. So um, our formula was too complex, I think, to let people manipulate it. And so our base scoring to keep it as good still works off our original formula. But something we've heard frequently is that people want to come up with their own prioritization scores based on how their leadership sees risk-based vulnerability management. And so that is, what's today, Wednesday? Yeah, so that is live as of 2 days ago. We also added an anchor connector, so a new technical integration just to automatically pull data into Dojo so you don't have to ship data in. And then finally, this one is not out yet, but there have been some changes to build better hierarchies of data, so better modeling companies in Dojo to associate vulnerabilities more accurately and build whatever custom structures you want in terms of how you actually see your company compared to making you stick to just a single data model. And then on the open source side of the house, this is probably the quietest month in terms of updates for open source and full transparency. So we've done some polishing on our docs. There's been some parser polish that's also done. We fixed certain dedupe edge cases that the open source community brought to our attention, and then also some minor performance improvements. And so, we've talked about this open source V3 quite a bit, and we are making good progress. Just this particular month wasn't too exciting, but we're still looking, I think, for the V3 alpha cutover at the end of December, potentially early January. Now that we've set the timeline, we're trying very much so to stick to it for the sake of the open source community, given that we communicated a date. And so I think that is everything we have for this month, Chris. Happy to take any questions.